Think about the apps you use on your phone every day. Studies have shown Americans use an average of 46 mobile apps each month to complete a variety of everyday tasks. Now imagine if you could combine all of those programs into a single standalone app, a one-stop shop to socialize with friends, order food, pay rent, or even consult with a doctor. A super app of sorts.
The super app is a software program meant to be used on a mobile device that has multiple diversified services and a common payment platform and is widely adopted.
The best and most popular example is Tencent's WeChat. Now, it began in 2011 as a simple messaging and photo sharing app. From there, it moved into payments, games, shopping, even a place to book your doctor's appointments.
While super apps have flourished in Asia, their adoption in Western markets, including the US, has been slower due to a variety of factors. But that could be changing as more and more tech companies set their sights on bringing the super app model to the US.
Elon Musk rebranding Twitter to X this morning. It's all part of his larger ambitions to create an everything app that combines messaging, social networks, and payments.
We're watching share.
For one, this seems like it would fail in Western markets, especially the US, because we have anti-monopoly regulations. So if you had one app that truly basically allowed you to do everything, chat, pay for things, order, chat with your doctor, whatever it was, the government would likely step in to kind of put an end to that. I think one of the big things is that a lot of China's apps and businesses are usually funded and regulated differently by the government. And so they like supporting those businesses, but they also have control directly from the government onto those businesses themselves. And so there's no need for them to kind of break up a monopoly because the government is the ultimate monopoly. And therefore, if they are putting out an app that does everything, then there's no reason not to use it. But that's going to be different in America because the government doesn't participate in those types of things. And so if they saw somebody like X or Uber or Google of some sort trying to get into this model and trying to take on more and more share, they would put an end to it because then that would crush competition and might not necessarily be as good for consumers.
Shares of Expedia and Uber this morning. A Financial Times report said that Uber has explored a possible bid for the travel booking website.
It fits into an ambition that CEO Dara Khosrowshahi has held for years, and that is to build a super app similar to a WeChat in China that combines multiple products and services on one platform.
So what's behind the appeal of super apps in Asia? Why has the United States been slow to adopt the everything app model? And can we expect a super app in the US anytime soon?
Super apps are basically an app where you can do multiple things within the app itself.
They can include anything from social media and messaging to ride hailing to online marketplace to dating to booking a doctor's appointment, and the list goes on.
Most of the well-known examples of super apps today are probably in Asia, namely in China. Tencent-owned WeChat really was the original super app. You've also got Alipay, which is run by Alibaba affiliate Ant Financial, also is a massive one as well. They collectively have about more than 2 billion users.
The most famous is China's WeChat. It started around 2011. It has messaging platform, social media platform, but then over time, they sort of bolted on all these additional services.
Ultimately, it notched 1.3 billion monthly users who had very little reason to ever leave this app. It became an ecosystem in and of itself.
And so by some estimates, the WeChat app has 1 million or more mini programs that are contained within this single, what we call a walled garden.
Elsewhere in Asia, super apps, they've taken off as well. You've got South Korea's Kakao. It's used by more than 90% of all smartphone users in the country. There's Line in Japan, Grab in Southeast Asia, Paytm in India.
But we're all sick of the dozens of apps on our phones. And the appeal of the super app is that all of those functions of those apps are in one place in the super app itself. It's convenient.
Convenience is definitely a value add here for something like a super app. Something that this makes me think of is similar to like Google account logins. So this is something that's pretty prevalent on the web right now. And this was made a number of years ago. But basically, having logins and passwords for a bunch of variety of accounts is kind of a hassle, and you have to keep track of all those. And so Google basically allows other websites to use their login to basically have a unique user and have them validated to some extent. And so this makes it easier to have that single login for a consumer, but then a variety of websites use it. So you'll see this sometimes if you go to a website and then it'll just pop up and say like, hey, would you like to log in with your Google account here? And that's exactly what that feature is. And so it would definitely be way more convenient to have a single app that does everything for you, because then you wouldn't have to log into a variety of apps. You know, your payment is there. You can go from store to store, app from app. You can share money with your friends after going out to eat or whatever it is. And then you can go order food, have it delivered to your house. So convenience would definitely be a key mechanism here. The other one is in other social platforms, you usually see having a large group of users is one of the keys to success in that environment. And so if you have a social network, but there aren't that many people there, then that network loses value. And so sometimes you see this where some popular social networks lose popularity over time because they start getting pulled into the other growing ones. And so you've seen this with like MySpace. You arguably see it now with Facebook, for instance, or Instagram, etc. Those were social networks that pulls from earlier versions. Then they start to gain a life of their own. People just start going in. Everybody had accounts. And then people started having less and less accounts of the previous accounts. And then there was less and less people there. So then that made the people who were still remaining less likely to stay on the platform. And it's kind of this cyclical event that occurs. And so those are some of the primary value adds. But again, I think this would be blocked in US due to monopoly laws, because again, since these aren't inherently regulated directly or managed directly by the government, being anti-monopoly would be one of the few things that the US government would do to help prevent things from going wrong. Because there's something that could backfire on you having a super app, which is what many companies try to do, is they effectively try to become a monopoly. But then at that point, you can do things like price gouging, you can stop developing new features, and then things get stale and customers like that product less, and they might have more complaints. And you can basically do whatever you want once you have the majority of people and they're all kind of locked in. And that's why we prevent monopolies in the US. And so I think that, again, they haven't mentioned it yet, but I think that will be a key piece here.
It's frictionless.
Because you have so many diversified services contained within a single app, this just makes it sort of a one-stop shop for consumers to have access to the variety of services that they would need for the majority of their daily life needs.
Professor Dan Prudhomme, who wrote about the likelihood of super app adoption in the US for the Harvard Business Review, says frequent app engagement also allows companies to collect data on individual users.
So it can help triangulate the product and service offerings that it gives to you, and it can also be useful for targeting advertisements. So it's really beneficial for consumers, it's beneficial for the service provider side, and it's also beneficial for advertisers.
Similarly, a greater willingness by Asian consumers to adopt the so-called everything app model, as well as a greater willingness by Asian companies to innovate, have both allowed super apps to gain widespread popularity in the region.
Super apps work in China and the broader Asian market because it's a very internet-savvy population, one that has leapfrogged desktop, gone straight to mobile.
Asian consumers in many markets were less locked into desktop-based applications. And so when an attractive mobile device-based app came along, they really adopted it widely. In many places in Asia, there's sort of less of an aversion to being reliant on a single company or few companies to sort of offer you products or services to cover the majority of your everyday needs.
Another critical element to super app adoption in Asia is the introduction of digital wallets.
One of the most important aspects of this is payments and banking. That is how those Asian super apps grew.
In the US, for example, the consumers and the merchants were very reliant on credit card infrastructures to transact. That is not the case in many places in Asia, China, and elsewhere. By introducing these digital wallets, which are essentially just kind of like a private bank that's not relying on credit card infrastructure to function, you offered sort of a cheaper and easier way to transact amongst consumers and merchants. And that certainly encouraged the adoption of the super apps in many places in Asia.
Many in Silicon Valley have long considered WeChat as the gold standard for mobile apps, and tech companies have set their ambitions on creating the next super app for the US market.
We already are, to some extent, seeing super apps in the United States. They're just not as super, if you will, as WeChat.
Elon Musk, for example, for years has spoken about X, the company he now owns, as turning into a super app. And you're seeing him talk about things like payments, for example, and other integrations into X. You think about WhatsApp, it's trialing out payments in India. Facebook Messenger has integrated Meta's AI assistant. So you're seeing all of those apps slowly bring on more and more features as well.
You look at Amazon, right? Of course, you have Marketplace, but you have video streaming and you have music streaming and you have a pharmacy option and a place to book doctor's appointments. You look at Facebook, you've got social media, you've got messaging, but you've also got a marketplace, you've got a gaming function, and Uber, of course, has ride hailing, but it also has Uber Eats and grocery delivery and parcel delivery and so on.
Uber, for its part, recently discussed a potential acquisition of the travel booking company Expedia.
So that individual just kind of highlighted some of the different functionality some of these larger companies have. I think that will continue. Obviously, they used all those as examples, especially because they are used for similar functionality that WeChat has. But Google is the same, or Alphabet, where they started doing a lot of systems. They had search, they had email, they have video conferencing, et cetera, et cetera. Like, there's so many things that Google has and you gain benefits from and you can use independently. And I think that is going to continue to be a trend as companies get large. There's no real place for them to grow if they are the biggest company in that market. So if they have the majority of the customer base, then what else are they really going to do? If you have 51% even, you can't even double your user base, even if you were to hit 100%. So it's going to be much more profitable to start looking into other segments of what consumers are spending their time on or spending their money on in order to get yourself some more growth. And so that's what these big companies are going to do. I agree with that sentiment. But again, I don't think I've really heard a good rationale for why super apps would become prevalent. Obviously, Uber or X would want to do this because, again, being a monopoly is great. You can set your own prices. You can do whatever you want with the customers there. But I think X even as a good example in my mind where Elon Musk has banned people for having personal arguments with him, things like that. They've removed their verification, etc. And so this is where you are at the whim of one company. In that case, one individual has an outside ownership of it and they can do whatever they want with it. But that's one of the downsides of this. I think one of the distinctions here is, like in China, for instance, people don't have as large of an expectation of privacy. Already their government monitors them a lot for a variety of purposes. Their internet and what they're able to read and see on the internet is regulated and checked by the Chinese government. And so they can hide information that they don't want you to see, or they can pump out information they do want you to see. And so this is just part of their daily life. And that's different from America, for sure, and other Western countries. And so I think this is going to be a big deal of, as they mentioned previously, if you have one app that does all these things, you can get so much data about a person. But I think that would still be something that the government wouldn't want in the best interest of the consumers. And I don't think every consumer is going to want that, especially as companies have done more and more, let's say, nefarious activities with people's personal information. I think that's going to make people hesitant to have one company that does everything in the long run myself, but they still haven't gotten to anything really more than the companies themselves want to do it, and it's easy once you have an app like this and it's popular in China. So I don't think I've really heard anything that would explain why America would adopt this yet, but we'll see if they cover that soon.
A move analysts say would further cement its status as a travel super app.
This is one step toward a super app, and no different than what we see in Asia. The super app concept is where Uber's going. This is really Uber trying more and more to be a one-stop shop when it comes to travel.
So I think there are clear examples of super-ish kind of apps already being widely adopted in the US. And to some extent, I think there's room for other super-ish kind of apps to take off in the US.
There are several reasons why tech companies have been unable to bring the super app model to the US. One of the main challenges, regulatory and antitrust concerns.
The regulatory environment in the US today is certainly not as conducive to allowing a super app to develop. There's very strong protections on things like peer-to-peer lending, data privacy, antitrust, and so on that don't allow the apps in the US to quite thrive in the same way that WeChat could.
If an app does everything, questions will be asked. Is it monopolistic? How is revenue being shared with the services that are on board the super app? Is it hurting competition? These are some of the other questions I think competition regulators will look at.
Another major challenge facing US companies, contending with existing competition in the marketplace today.
The US market is way more fragmented and there are so many more players and competitors. You think about China. WeChat is the dominant messaging app. It's so ingrained in a Chinese society and used by Chinese people every single day. But in the US, it's different. There's WhatsApp, there's Apple iMessage, there's Signal, there's Telegrams, there's multiple different messaging apps. And in a particular category, you think food delivery, you think taxis, so there's multiple different competitors who are often rivaling each other. And actually, they don't want to share data or share customers.
And also in China, there was, of course, some protectionism, which allowed, namely WeChat as an infant company, being shielded from, say, competition by Facebook or Twitter or Google, YouTube, and so on.
Then there's the third obstacle for companies, user behavior.
So just to elaborate on that a little bit, they didn't really get too deep into it, but this is also a key reason why these things would be more prevalent in China, as an example, which is they've completely banned certain apps that we use in America in the Chinese market. So like you can't use Google there, for instance, and I'm not sure about Facebook, etc., but there's a plethora, there's dozens of apps that they don't allow there at all. And so that's one way to hinder competition. So like, for instance, if you're in China and you can't use Facebook to chat or Messenger to chat with folks, or maybe any other predominant app that we use in America, then of course you're going to use the one big app that everyone else is using because it's the only one that's allowed in your environment. And so that also facilitates monopoly-like behavior. And again, this is backed by the government. In many cases, they have their hands in a lot of big companies, and they would want that for themselves. And so this is just where they are artificially reducing competition there by banning other large apps from participating in that market. And we don't do that in the US as much. Obviously, we're discussing TikTok and banning that here for a variety of purposes, but that'll be like one of the first times we've done it in the US. And even if TikTok is banned, there's still a number of other apps that do something similar, even though not as popular. But that's where, in that exact case, if we ban TikTok, then you'd have to go someplace else, maybe like an Instagram, or maybe you'd go to like YouTube for shorts of some type. And then boom, you went from 3 people maybe in the space predominantly leading it to now you're at 2. And so there's less competition, and then therefore a larger portion of the population is going to be using one of those 2 apps. And so that's another artificial way to kind of force up and prop up a super app like they have done in China.
People have different relationships with brands, with the apps they use. If I'm going to book a holiday or a flight, I might use a specific provider. Or if I like my food delivery from a certain place, I go there, or my shopping from another place, I'll go there. So you have to have the users on board. Will they be willing to say, use all these services via an app that's owned by Meta or by Uber or by Apple or whatever company it is? I think you can expect to see a super app in the US, but nothing like how it is in Asia. It would be perhaps a super app light, shall we call it. You'll see green shoots of that appear. Companies will begin to start adding features and integrating other services into the app.
I don't think we're going to see a super app in the sense of WeChat, right? If we use that as the gold standard of what a super app is, it's kind of a global anomaly. It has, 1 million or more mini programs embedded in it. We're not going to see something like that in the US, I don't think, anytime soon.
But some of the challenges around the fragmented marketplace, user behavior, regulation will really, I think, stop a US company from building anything akin to the likes of WeChat in China, for example.
However, we already are seeing super apps of sorts, what we could call super-ish apps, being widely adopted in the US. So we have Amazon and Facebook and Uber, and together they have a lot of different services that really cover the majority, I think, of people's everyday needs.
Uber, for its part, has said it would continue building on its super app ambitions.
We are slowly but surely building that super app that can be your operating system in your local town. Anything and everything that you want, anywhere you want to go, we as Uber want to be there for you. There's no other company that's trying to do this, and there's no other company that's executing that local super app vision as we are.
The super app definitely began life as a Chinese phenomenon, spread out to the rest of Asia, but there's no reason why some aspects of that can't be replicated around other parts of the world. I think it's just a longer journey. It's more of a journey that requires changes in user behavior.
It's very apparent now that US consumers are willing to adopt a super-ish kind of app. They like the convenience of the apps. They don't want to have app overload where they're downloading all different types of apps. And so I think there's a real, value proposition there for super apps.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.